Welcome back, everybody. We're talking about the Kristopher Love case, a man who's on trial for capital murder, and it's alleged that he was hired by a woman who was the ex-girlfriend of the man, and she hired this man, Kristopher Love, to kill her ex-boyfriend's new love interest. This is a really, really sad case, and we just heard from Kendra Hatcher, the victim's mother, earlier. And I want to talk more about this case because this is going to be one of our live trials today. So to help me talk a little bit more about it and make sense of where we are, joining me right now is criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor Nicole DeBorde. Nicole, great to have you here.
Good to be here. Good morning.
These murder-for-hire cases, we're no stranger to them here on Law and Crime, but realistically, are they tough to prosecute?
They can be, although a lot of times when you have a murder-for-hire type situation, there's a spouse that doesn't want to believe that the other spouse would have hired somebody to have them killed, and quite frankly, that's what makes it difficult. We don't have the same hurdles in this case because the complainant is not someone in an ongoing relationship with the person who hired the hitman. So I think that this is a little bit different than what we normally see, unfortunately, or fortunately, as the case may be, in these types of cases.
Now, this, correct me if I'm wrong, this is a rarity in the sense that this is a, he may face the death penalty. And I don't think Texas has considered this kind of case since 2013. So why now?
It varies county to county and DA's office to DA's office, whether or not they will seek the death penalty. And different offices have a variety of procedures that they use to determine whether or not a particular capital murder, which can carry the death penalty in Texas, should be tried as a death penalty case. They're extremely expensive to try. They will be on appeal for many, many, many years. And the reality is that a DA's office has to decide whether or not they have the resources to continue this sort of prosecution for the many years that it's going to take.
And murder-for-hire cases are kind of those cases that classify as death penalty eligible. But let's talk a little bit more about some really, really compelling testimony from yesterday. So we know that the prosecution is saying Kristopher Love was hired by this woman, Brenda Delgado, to kill Brenda Hatcher. And this is all because it's alleged that Brenda Delgado didn't like the fact that the victim was dating her ex-boyfriend, Ricardo. Ricardo took the stand yesterday. Let's play some of his testimony right now. Nicole, can you imagine for this man being the center of this, that he is the focal point of why this maybe happened? I mean, can you even imagine being in his shoes?
No, I mean, it's horrifying. And I'm sure that he has gone over in his mind 1,000 different little details that could have meant something had he known what this ex-girlfriend was up to. I think that he's probably going through every single possible way he could have identified this as a potential problem before it happened to try to make it not have happened. But you can't go back in time, and his grief is going to be forever.
Yeah, maybe he knew something was off, but to the extent that, this would be a murder-for-hire plot and he'd be testifying in the trial of the man accused of killing his ex-girlfriend, who can imagine that? But I'll tell you what we can imagine. What was going on with this, with Ricardo? He knew that something was off, and I think he knew that there was a problem here between Brenda and Kendra in the sense that maybe he had to be careful about how he told one about the other. So let's see his testimony when he discusses both Brenda and Kendra. Okay, so it should be noted that Brenda Delgado was captured, and she will face a trial at a later date. But right now we're talking about Kristopher Love, the man that she allegedly hired to kill Miss Hatcher. And this is a really, really sad situation. Back here with Nicole DeBorde. Nicole, people that hire other people to take out someone, does that create a more messy situation for someone to try to escape the law? In other words, if you're trying to cover up a murder, is it easier for someone to do it themselves or hire a third party to do it? Because you imagine they're hiring a third party because it's one step removed and they might not be implicated.
Exactly. And really the credibility of the person who claims that they were hired is a big question. And certainly someone who would agree to do such a thing isn't going to be a very credible individual. So, I mean, it is indeed one step removed and one additional thing for the prosecution to have to deal with in a murder for hire type situation. You know, it's hard to make sure that you have all of these details nailed down. You know, oftentimes law enforcement will actually have attempted murder for hire type situations that they prosecute, where they actually have their own quote unquote hitman, you know, having conversations that are tape recorded with the person trying to hire the killer. But in this case, this actually happened, and now we're relying on, you know, the pieces of this individual who was hired to kill this person, providing pieces of the puzzle, and going back in time and just looking for details and trying to make it all fit.
This is a very serious charge. So how does Kristopher Love's team defend this?
You know, it depends on how the evidence was collected, how they are linking him to the crime, whether or not they have actual physical evidence that shows that he was involved. You know, it's a very difficult task for them. And if they can try to do anything to mitigate his punishment by having him hold the responsible party, the person who hired him, responsible for setting up this plan, that may be his only hope. In other words, trying to get a lesser sentence by ratting somebody else out may be the only way that they can go.
Well, there's a lot of people who have been implicated in connection with this event, and but the prosecution believes that they have enough to prosecute and successfully prosecute Kristopher Love. Let's see what they said in their opening statement. Nicole, never very good when the defendant himself incriminates himself by saying, I mean, he said, his girlfriend said, if you shot that lady, you should have gotten rid of the gun. And apparently his response was, I know. It's not good if you're sitting in the defense counsel.
Right. No, it definitely makes this a very tough case for the defense. I mean, there are many reasons that you try a case as the defense, and sometimes it's just to mitigate punishment. Sometimes it's that, you know, what the prosecutor wants to happen to you in punishment is too much. And, you know, if you're doing what you can in this case to try to get life out of this, or maybe even life with parole, because capital murders are life without parole cases, that may be what's afoot here. On the other hand, they may think that there are real problems with the way this evidence was collected, or whether or not the person who claims that Love said these things is credible herself. So, you know, this is, who knows what the defense has got planned, but it could be a number of different things or reasons why they are trying this case. We don't know that at this point.
As the case continues, we can't forget that the death penalty is on the line. Is it possible his defense will say mid-trial, hey, let's try to work on a deal here? Or the prosecution be like, hey, we're having a strong case right now, no deal?
It would be very, very unusual for the prosecution to elect to go forward with a death penalty case and then make a deal in the middle of trial. Usually by the time you're in front of a jury with a death penalty case, the case is going to go all the way to the end. And really, in circumstances where the state is seeking death, many times what the defense is doing is trying to make sure that the government doesn't get to kill their client. And so it isn't always necessarily about innocence so much as it is about trying to make sure that there's enough mitigating information out there for a jury to not death.
And there's a lot at stake for everyone involved. So we'll take a quick break. We'll be right back. Everybody. So the jury obviously had a question there in the Moore case. They want to review some evidence. They're going to be able to watch that Walmart video again of Sidney Moore buying that pregnancy test. Again, the question is, who was he buying the pregnancy test for? And also, they wanted to review Tammy Moore's I think cell phone, or the cell phone of her father. But again, it was kind of hard to hear at the end what that issue was. But let's talk about this more with Nicole DeBorde. Nicole, we're waiting to see what the jury will ultimately come back with in their verdict. Obviously, they've begun their deliberations. They have some questions. How difficult is it for them to deliberate this kind of case?
I think that it's very challenging, and the fact that there's already a question shows, you know, that they're struggling with certain issues. You never can tell, by the way, why questions are asked. Sometimes, you know, there are several jurors who believe that they know the answer, and they want to prove to another juror that they're right, and so they ask for the information. And sometimes they really don't know the answer, and they want to get the information so that they can talk about the issue further. So trying to read what they're thinking by hearing the questions is sometimes a bit like reading tea leaves, but it's a struggle.
And how much do you think they're debating, hey, listen, we didn't love her going on the stand. We don't like the way she presented herself on the stand. But really, what's the physical evidence tying her to a kidnapping plot? You tell me. Is that really what they're going to be deciding, that balancing act?
Sure, no, absolutely. I mean, they're going to have to be weighing whether or not they, liked this defendant. Likely, I think those are going to struggle to find her a likable person. And so they're really going to try to find information to support whatever theory it is they walked into that jury room with.
Yeah.
Psychology tells us that they look for facts to support what they're already feeling. And they're probably trying to find out whether or not the government or the state brought the details necessary to give a conviction in this case.
Not easy sitting on a jury, especially in this kind of case. We are going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to talk about Kristopher Love. It should be noted that the getaway driver in connection with that case, Cortes, we believe will be testifying this morning. Stay tuned here on Law and Crime. About the timeline of events right now, let me bring in my special guest, criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor Nicole DeBorde. Nicole, this witness is very interesting. We're learning a little bit about how his car was used in connection with this alleged crime, and it's pretty fascinating to hear how he was just living his life, knew this Brenda Delgado woman, and then knew Crystal Cortes, and now he's testifying, and it's probably incredible for him to be sitting there testifying to what he's testifying to.
I'm sure he's in a state of disbelief and wishes he would have known or done something differently. Clearly he's trying to do everything he can to be cooperative with law enforcement and with the prosecution, and is just telling it like he knows it. That's the impression that I'm getting from his testimony. And
we're setting up the timeline, right? I mean, that receipt, people might think it's innocuous, but it helps establish a timeline that he didn't have his car, but Crystal did.
Absolutely, and I think that is just part of beginning to set up all of the little circumstantial details that get the government where they need to be in this case.
And when you see these kinds of cases, maybe even for murder for hire cases, how many things are left, undone? These are not professionals, so many things are left that will then be entered into evidence to help show how they may have committed this crime.
Sure, and as much as they're not professionals is true, they also don't generally do things on video or on camera so that we can just replay it later and see it for ourselves. And they think that they're being clever when they set up these crimes and, go about planning these things. But, ideally and hopefully they've never done this before, and they make mistakes. And we're seeing the little pieces of evidence that come from those mistakes.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating to watch, but also very tragic to listen to as well. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back and be live in Kristopher Love. Okay, welcome back, everybody. We have an update in the Tammy Moore case out of South Carolina. The jury is asked to view surveillance footage from Walmart on Seaboard Street, where Sidney Moore was seen getting out of his truck to buy a pregnancy test. They've also asked to see the surveillance footage from a business and a home on Highway 814 that the state says shows the Moore truck driving to the Peachtree Landing. That was, again, the last place where we believe Heather Elvis was, where we can track her location. So the jury wants to see that surveillance footage. That is what they are being shown. It should be noted they asked for one other thing. They wanted to see this alleged photo of Heather that you'll remember Tammy Moore's cousin testified to. He testified earlier in connection with this case that he saw a photo on Sidney Moore's phone of Heather in a state where she could not walk and she could not talk. That photo, for all we know, doesn't exist. We can't find that photo. All we know of it is what Tammy's cousin has said of this photo. So obviously the jury will not have an opportunity to see that. But what this does let you know is they're looking at the evidence that the prosecution has put forward to tie Tammy Moore to the disappearance of Heather Elvis. So again, they are continuing their deliberations, and they are looking at those pieces of evidence one more time. I do want to let you know that we are waiting for the live feed to begin in our brand new case out of Texas, the Terry Thompson case. That's a live feed into that courtroom, the man who's charged with murder, the murder of John Hernandez. It's alleged that he engaged in a fight with him at a Denny's, put him in a chokehold that ultimately resulted in his death. He's claiming self-defense. His wife, who is a co-defendant but not in this trial, she was a Harris County deputy off duty at the time, and that adds to further issues and complexities in this case. So we will be live in that courtroom. We expect opening statements soon. And again, that is the Terry Thompson case out of Texas. But let's now go to a different place in Texas, because we're going to the Kristopher Love case. The man who was allegedly hired by a woman named Brenda Delgado to kill the victim, Kendra Hatcher, a dentist. It was alleged that Brenda Delgado was furious and jealous over Kendra dating her ex-boyfriend, and that she hired Mr. Love to take her out. Now this is his trial, his capital murder trial, and of course the death penalty is on the table. On the stand right now is Jose Ortiz, a man who knew Brenda Delgado, as well as Cortes, the alleged getaway driver. I wanted to jump back into the courtroom, but it looks like there's a sidebar right now. Let me bring back in Nicole DeBorde to break it down. Nicole, this is a messy situation in Love. You have multiple people who were implicated, and you have Brenda Delgado, who almost escaped. She fled to Mexico, but was able to be apprehended. This is a strange series of events.
No doubt. And the stranger the circumstance, the worse it is for the state, because when you're trying to put together pieces of a puzzle that are very unusual, people tend to think it doesn't make sense and that you're missing something. So they're trying to do everything they can to explain each of these strange details through these witnesses. And, somebody else driving a Jeep that belonged to another person is just one of those odd details.
And I want to circle back to a conversation we had earlier about why this is a death penalty case. We cover those kinds of really horrific crimes, particularly against children, where the death penalty is on the table. But is that because this case, the reason it's death penalty eligible, and again, it's a horrific case about a woman who was shot to death, but is it really on the table because of the nature of the murder for hire aspect?
It may be that the planning involved was so inflammatory in the opinion of the district attorney that they felt like this was an appropriate case for the death penalty. Not all capital murders in Texas are deemed death penalty cases by the district attorney prosecuting them. And, I mentioned earlier that unfortunately resources really plays a part in whether or not they decide to proceed with the death penalty case. A district attorney's office, if they're going to prosecute these cases, have to plan for a long and expensive battle. And they must have felt like the evidence in this planning was so inflammatory and so bad that the facts merited death.
I believe we're getting a note. I want to let everybody know that we believe the jury was asked to step out for a moment in the Love case. That's why there's a current break, but we're going to jump back in there. Nicole, if you're the prosecution, you want 3 successful convictions here, right? You want Kristopher Love, you want Brenda Delgado, and you want Cortes. Do you think at any point in this case there was a conversation with any of them, hey, listen, if you testify about the other one, we might be lenient on you? Do you think there was any way that they were having that conversation?
I think it's likely. Oftentimes, especially when you don't have direct evidence of what happened, you're going to want to use co-defendants to testify against the other. And if one of these co-defendants is willing to come forward and tell all of the details that they know, oftentimes the district attorney's office will offer them a deal. So it's very possible that one or more of these co-defendants were approached about whether or not they would be willing to talk. They won't tell a co-defendant in that circumstance exactly what they're getting in exchange for their testimony, but oftentimes it's something like parole eligibility or taking the death penalty off the table. And
Cortes, this getaway driver, we believe that she will be testifying in this case today, so stand by for that. We're going to jump back live into Love in a minute, but before we do, here's a special report about what else is trending in the country today.
Here are today's top crime stories trending on Law&Crime.com and across the country. Former NFL player Ray Caruth was released from prison after serving an 18-year sentence for orchestrating a plot to murder the mother of his unborn child. Caruth was found guilty of conspiring to kill Cherika Adams to avoid paying child support in 1999. Adams was shot 4 times and died a month later. The unborn child was delivered but suffers from permanent brain damage and cerebral palsy. The former Carolina Panthers wide receiver will now be on a 9-month post-release program and is reportedly seeking custody of his son. The New York Police Department recalled nearly 3,000 body cameras from service after one exploded inside of a Staten Island precinct. According to investigators, a Vivu LE5 body camera allegedly exploded after an officer noticed smoke coming from the bottom of the unit. New York currently has over 15,000 body-worn cameras, but the other 12,000 units are an earlier model, the Vivu LE4, which have not had any explosive defects. A man in Pennsylvania convicted of murdering his stepdaughter and wife reportedly confessed to another murder, and authorities believe he might be connected to as many as 16 murders. 59-year-old Regis Andrew Brown pleaded guilty to the slayings of his 53-year-old wife, Michelle Brown, and his 35-year-old stepdaughter, Tammy Greenawalt, earlier this year and was given a life sentence. Brown allegedly confessed to police he was the gunman behind the 1988 cold case murder of 45-year-old Bryce Kenneth Tompkins of Newcastle. Authorities now believe Brown could be responsible for up to 16 murders between 1986 and 2016 in the eastern part of the state. Those were today's top crime stories. I'm Anthony Velez for Law and Crime.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. Great reporting, Anthony. Go to lawandcrime.com to learn a little bit more of the top trending stories of the day. We are going live right now into Kristopher Love because Cortes, this alleged getaway driver, is on the stand. My timing couldn't have been better when I said, is it possible one of the people implicated in this crime would testify against the other? This is a clear roadmap of everything went down.
You knew what was going to happen. It happened. And sure enough, you have a witness on the stand who has everything to gain by consistently testifying with whatever she's already told the police. She's already made a deal so that she doesn't face the same type of punishment that her co-defendants will face. So she's talking, and she's going to say everything that she's already said, probably to the letter, so that she keeps that deal.
Yeah, she pled guilty for a 35-year sentence. It could have been much worse for her, but we can only imagine what the defense will do under cross-examination because they're not going to take this lying down, or at least you imagine they won't. But this is some pretty heavy stuff about listening to how Kristopher Love was implicated in this crime. We'll take a quick break on our end, but when we come back, we will be live in that courtroom. Stay tuned here on Law and Crime. All right, Nicole, we got to talk about what's happening right now in this courtroom. But before we get really into the meat of her testimony, I have a quick question for you. We see the photo of the victim, Kendra Hatcher, in the background, and it's left there for the jury to see throughout every witness. Is that appropriate?
It really isn't, and I think that the prosecutor is playing with fire by posting it there and leaving it there. The reality is that there are Texas cases that say when you're doing something just to inflame the jury, that you're going to create a problem and potentially have the case reversed. There's actually a Texas case where the prosecutor showed, for real no evidentiary purpose, a picture of a fetus from the decedent, and this case was reversed. So leaving a picture up of the decedent in this case while other people testify is distracting, it's inflammatory, it serves no probative value whatsoever. It's only there to tug on the heartstrings of the jurors watching the testimony to distract them from the actual witness who's testifying.
It may not even be needed at the end, considering this testimony from Cortes is pretty damning. And it explains how this whole murder-for-hire plot was planned and what ultimately happened to this young woman. Now, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, there's a lot to discuss. Again, we're covering 4 live trials here on Law and Crime. Thanks, Anthony. You can go to lawandcrime.com to learn a little bit more of the top trending stories of the day. Here, though, we want to focus back on the Terry Thompson case, which is currently underway. We saw the opening statements. They're in a break right now. Nothing's live. We're going to jump back in there in a minute as soon as it goes live. I want to bring back in criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor Nicole DeBorde, who's helped be here today and talk about these really interesting cases that we're covering. This is a retrial of Terry Thompson. So the first one ended in a hung jury. How do you think that this trial is going to be different?
You know, I think that the prosecution is going to really push to get in additional information that didn't get covered in the first trial. And I think we could already hear right out of the box that the defense attorney is very aggressively defending his territory. In other words, you're hearing him object repeatedly, which is probably a smart tactic because we can't, if you're the defense, have the prosecution crossing that line and saying things that shouldn't come into evidence in front of this jury.
Now, if the defense can point the finger at the victim and say that he was the aggressor, does that really matter? Because the use of a chokehold is a different kind of fighting technique, is it not? I mean, it's not like a punch where you throw a punch and then there's a result. Here, if you put someone in a chokehold, they can determine when to let that chokehold go, and perhaps he held on to it for too long.
Right, and I think that that's the main question for the jury here is, was this an appropriate use of force even in a self-defense circumstance, and did it go too far? I mean, if there was a point at which the jury feels this defendant should have let go, they're going to convict him. But if they feel that he had the right to use force and to continue using force, then he's going to walk. And so really that's the main decision that this jury has to make in this case.
Yeah, and we can't forget the fact that Thompson's wife, Shauna, is a former Harris County Sheriff's deputy. She faces her own set of murder charges for her role in the altercation, and she's going to be tried separately. But that is another factor that we will consider when we analyze this case. Let's take a quick break, and when we come back, a lot more to discuss. Welcome back, everybody. We're still talking about the Terry Thompson case out of Texas, a new trial that we're covering here on Law and Crime. The man who's on trial for the murder of a man that resulted all in a horrible altercation at Denny's. And it was alleged that he put the victim, John Hernandez, in a chokehold that resulted in his death. Now, this is a retrial of Mr. Thompson. His first trial ended in a hung jury. I'm back here with Nicole DeBorde to break it down. You know, Nicole, we're going to show the video of this fight as we talk. But one of the things to note is the defense said that in the first trial, it was 11-1 split, 11 voting to acquit Thompson. I'm assuming they hope for the same kind of thing moving forward in this trial, but why would there be such an overwhelming circumstance, overwhelming amount of jurors voting to acquit here? They obviously believe there might have been more of self-defense than the prosecution is letting on.
Exactly, and it's very interesting that the prosecution is choosing to proceed in this circumstance, having already heard from the vast majority of jurors in their first presentation of this case that they felt that it was a not guilty. You know, there are many, many people in Harris County waiting for trials. The courthouse is still closed largely because of Harvey, and each court is very limited on how many cases they can try. So choosing to try this one, despite the fact that there's a dead body, is an unusual move by this prosecution team. And
maybe that's because of the fight of the video. They feel it's really incriminating evidence. So let's show that fight right now, and I warn our viewers right now, viewer discretion advised, because this is very graphic. Take a look. All right, Nicole, I'm going to ask you the question just straight up. What's your reaction to seeing some of that video?
Oh, it's horrible. You know, it's really sad to watch what we know is happening. You know, it's not clear, obviously, to the people who are watching it what's about to happen. But, you know, obviously this man died, and it's tragic. Obviously, there was some really poor decision making going on. You do have to wonder, even with a self-defense claim, when you have so many people around, whether or not that will factor in to this juror's view of whether he had to do what he did.
And you can see when the prosecution says that it seemed like Hernandez was tapping out and he was trying to let go and surrender. And unfortunately, this resulted in his death. It's a tragic case. And we're trying to understand how this happened. One thing to note is that Shauna Thompson, who you see in the video, she is the wife of the defendant. She's facing her own murder charges for a role in the altercation. But when you read up about this case, there was a question about whether or not the fact that she was part of law enforcement, was that a reason why they were initially not charged in connection with this?
In Harris County cases, when there is a question about whether or not it's a self-defense homicide or whether it actually rises to the level of murder, go through what's called a direct presentation process to the grand jury. And it may have been that they were just taking time to present all of the facts as they were gathering them to the grand jury, to let the grand jury make a decision about whether or not this case should be indicted as a murder. It may have taken extra time because of her role as the sheriff's deputy to gather all of the information in this case.
So don't necessarily assume something nefarious is going on because people see this and they see a deputy and they're wondering, how was this not initially charged? Was there some sort of, corruption going on here? And let's not necessarily assume that from the beginning, but I wonder if that'll become an issue in this man's second trial. We're going to switch gears, though, on our end, because that's not the only live trial that we're covering here on Law and Crime. We're also covering the Kristopher Love case, the man who's on trial for shooting and killing a dentist in Texas, and it's alleged that he was hired by another woman to do this. I want to play the testimony right now of Bonnie Jamison. This is the mother of the victim, Kendra Hatcher, and I want to play that testimony right now. It is very emotional. Take a look. Nicole, you know what's horrific about this case and so tragic? This woman, this victim, really didn't even know Kristopher Love or Brenda Delgado or Crystal Cortes. She was minding her business, and what we're listening from Crystal Cortes, who testified earlier, she was being stalked and plotted against. And now you see the human aspect of this, how everybody's affected from her death. It's a really tragic case.
Oh, it's horrific. It's beyond tragic, and it's so heartbreaking, which is really watching this mother's testimony is just one more reason for this prosecutor to toe the line and to try a clean case. Leaving the complainant's picture up on the wall while this thing is going on is a terrible mistake for this prosecutor. It's not needed. And why tempt a reversal in this case over something stupid?
Yeah, I hear you. But, you know, the prosecution is trying to build their case multiple ways. And one of the ways that they want to do that is talk with witnesses who knew the perpetrators of this crime, or the alleged perpetrators of this crime, and were intimately involved in the events leading up to that. One of those witnesses is Jose Ortiz, a man who was good friends with Brenda Delgado and met Cortes. His testimony from earlier today was very interesting. Take a look. I mean, we're not talking about planning a picnic here. We're talking about planning a murder. And I'm back here with Nicole DeBorde. I have to step back and think about what I'm listening to. These people who plotted a murder and were so instrumental in what they did, and they did practice runs, and they tried to plan it out. This is really evil.
They got it done. They just got caught. It's really unbelievable the casual way that they talk about planning to take somebody's life. And I can't imagine that the jury is anything but enraged hearing this testimony.
Yeah, and you're listening to this and you're trying to make sense of it. She had a very big role. I suppose it was a good for her that she took that plea deal.
It probably was very smart and has probably saved her a lot of time. Yeah. She's young. She will become eligible for parole while she's still alive. And that's a huge advantage for her.
Yeah, it definitely is. Nicole, stand by. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be live back in the Love case. Okay, welcome back, everybody. I want to give you an update in the Tammy Moore case out of South Carolina. The jury has another question, so we'll update you about that in a minute. I do want to bring back in Nicole DeBorde. I have to sign you off, Nicole, but before I do, what do you think about this testimony about this, that they were going to make this murder really look like a robbery?
It's chilling. I mean, it gives you some insight into the detail and planning that went on and taking this poor woman's life who had no idea that she even had these enemies. It's really just heartbreaking, and I think the prosecution has done a great job of giving us the details of how and why and when.
You said it right. Nicole, thank you so much for coming on and talking about all of our cases today. It was always great having you.
Thanks for having me.
All right, everybody, we're going to take a quick break on our end. I will be signing off. Rachel Stockman will be signing in, and we have a lot of trials that we're covering here on Law and Crime, so stay tuned. We'll be right back right after this.